Thanks, Nancy, and thank you, Ethnotech, for hosting this event. And thank you, storytellers, for your amazing stories and performances. So let's give them another hand, please. Please start thinking about questions you want to ask the storytellers now. We're going to spend most of the time having a dialogue with them. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll run and bring you a mic. And I'll start with the first question. And to preface what's happening, all your stories were really powerful and are actually really exemplary of what's been happening. So our recent surveys show that 1 out of 2 Asian Americans experience this type of hate. Conservatively, we think 1 out of 5 have, and that's 5 million cases of hate like yours over the last year. Similar ones of people chasing us with cars, throwing bottles and rocks at us, being surrounded, being told to go back home. So they're not uncommon. And because of all this hate, I'm calling this a period of collective racial trauma. 1 out of 2 Asian Americans feel unsafe due to their race at this moment, so half of us. We're the racial group who have the least sense of belonging in this nation now. And they say it's because of discrimination and because of the lack of representation they see in their communities. So it's a really difficult time for our communities, and each of you have responded in your stories to the trauma in very trauma-responsive ways. It's going into fight response, right? And some of you did that. Some of you had flight response, where you're trying to become very avoidant. There's freezing, where you don't know what to do. You're thinking, what can I say that would make a difference? And so what I want to ask each of you and share is, as you retell the stories, you're adding another layer to the story, right? You're actually maybe remaking the story, rewriting the story for yourself. And as you tell the audience, that's another layer of connecting with people and performing the story. And so I think it's a way that we could heal from the trauma beyond going into fight or flight response, right? And I'm calling it flocking, that beyond fight or flight, we're flocking, and we're sharing our story. And so my question for each of you is, as you retell the story, how's it for you to rethink the story? How's it for you to perform the story again and again, if that makes sense?
Okay, I'll start. What came to mind as you were talking about this, there's famous Asian American songwriters, Nobuko Miyamoto, Chris Ijima, and there was a song where they made an allegory to a grain of sand. And the grain of sand goes into the oyster shell and it builds up a pearl. And the pearl is built layer upon layer, and as light comes through it, it reflects different aspects of the spectrum, which makes it beautiful. So as a storyteller, you know, the incident that happened to me, I built it up as layers of layers. There were actually layers of other incidences that happened like that, where people called me names, I felt diminished, and so it wasn't, it's historic fiction, but on the other hand, because like a pearl, it's reflecting different aspects of experiences I've had, and therefore experiences that my communities have. It's something, a sign of strength, because we can hold it up, look at it, re-examine it over many, many decades. And now with this rise in anti-Asian hate, it's like, yeah, it's not going away. All that stuff I experienced as a kid is now grown and expanded. And maybe the difference is now we have voice and we have access and we have community of a diverse Pan-Asian American community. So that's what came up for me.
For me, so I've told this story in different iterations and different process of healing in many ways. This is like the first audience that I've told the story, primarily Asian Americans, and thank you for that. It's really a wonderful experience for me to do this for that reason, because this story is for you, is for seeing how we can go beyond. I mean, I grew up knowing that therapy was never an option and weakness was never an option. You always just, you know, stick your head down and you work really hard and you'll do well. And that was the thought in my head. And I realized that for me, there are so many different options we can go by and we can figure out and we can do and heal as a community. So this was a really amazing experience to tell this story to you.
Yeah, my cousin was murdered 9 years ago on May 4th, and so it coincides with Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so that always is the marker for me that there are other reasons why May is the month. The Golden Spike was driven on that in May. The first Japanese immigrant came in May. But for me, AANHPI month is May because my cousin was killed in May. And so I mentioned that, you usually write a story or you tell the story from the scar and not the wound, so that it's not therapy, it's not therapeutic that we do the storytelling. Because by virtue of being in front of you and telling you the story, we're actually saying, we're okay, we survived, and we are sharing this story so that maybe it resonates and helps someone out there who hears it, maybe another Asian American. Because if they can hear that something that happened not 9 years ago, not in the case of my father in 1928, something that, like if it happened to you the last 3 years and you're still feeling a certain trauma, the idea is that maybe you could take our stories that are told and that to make sense of our lived experience, and we survived. Maybe then you can learn something from our sharing, our gifting of a story to you.
When my mother describes me, it's always as whichever white person's on TV. Like, oh, you look like that, and it's like just the idea that I came here to have beautiful white children, and if I can identify you with someone famous on TV, isn't that good for both of us? Isn't that nice?
Wow.
But when she started worrying about the COVID hate crimes, then she was telling me, don't go outside. And it was the first time I had heard her identify me as Asian.
Wow.
But it had to take a certain circumstance.
Going to school in ethnic studies, I learned that the exit interview for leaving the U.S. concentration camps for Japanese Americans was the exit interview asked you, are you going to speak Japanese? And the right answer was no. Are you going to associate with other Japanese? And the right answer was no. And so then I began to understand the assimilationist kind of policies that my parents wanted me to follow. That no, you don't speak that, English, and you associate with white folks, etc. Because that was a policy. And I hadn't known that till ethnic studies.
Wow.
But yeah, that was a real interesting.
That's astonishing to me. That kind of just blatant racism. It's our government.
MJ, I loved how, your story ended on the note of like, I sought help, right? It's like we experience all these things and we feel like we need to swallow it all or make sense of it, compete with that voice in our head that is questioning, right, the validity of that experience. So I'm just really curious, what has supported you in being able to come to that place to not just like intellectually parse your experience, but also like emotionally like grieve what happened, right? Affirm it, and then create that safety for yourself, for your creativity, for that inner child of yours, like to come and start playing with it, to be able to share it in a way that starts to connect. This is a question I'm asking for myself too, integrating my experiences, but also on behalf of, many people I'm working with who are looking for this support. often come from a family history, very like genealogy, data heavy context, and it's like, all right, but what's that emotional thread?
I mean, you know, data is important too, but it's done for an emotional reason. So I think that helps to bring it together. So they always say storytelling enters the mind through the heart. And so that's what you mean by that. It's an emotional telling. But you can't be all emotion, or you could turn people away, right? And you could melt on stage. So there is always a perspective.
Well, there's narrative, right? I mean, there's always narrative. You know, there's always Plato, right? Beginning, middle, and end. There's always some kind of hero's journey, right? You know, something happens, we are thrust into this problem-solving journey, we get to a climax, we solve it, everyone's happy at the end. Or there's a change, right? Story is about change. And, you know, so in a very simple story, yeah, things were violent, we were sad, now we're happy because we've gone through the journey.
So the journey that I went through is I found several affinity groups online that I could listen to other people's stories and realize that I wasn't alone in my experience. That really helped me. What also helped me was exercising again. I didn't exercise during COVID, but it was really important for my mental health to exercise and to feel strong again in a way that, you know, like I know I'm petite and all that stuff, but in my head, I can like stop a car. Hopefully I'll never have to do that. But just to have that in my mind, that's possible, that I, you know, and also like my daughter and I, we like talked about the different things that we could have said, the different things we could have done, and when it's worth it and when it's not. Because sometimes it's not worth it and sometimes it is. So that was very helpful. And honestly, in terms of the therapy aspect, it was helpful for me to know my boundaries of what wasn't going to work for me. So for me, I decided not to take any sort of medication. I try to do as natural things as possible, but be open to it if I had to. But also like reprogramming my brain, going like, and realizing and really building in a weird sort of way empathy for the people who feel like they have to belittle me. Like I felt like, you know, what lives do they lead in order to do that? And then ultimately, my friend said, and talking to my friends, and my friend said, the best revenge, because I do like revenge, quite frankly, the best revenge is doing well and going for everything, going for anything that scares you, like as an actor and a writer and all that stuff, I have to like put myself on the line all the time and just do it. And do my best in the way and be aware of what roles I'll take and be aware of what I'm writing and be aware of who I want to work with and who I want to employ. So in that way, I've built a community too.
I've learned recently that great-grandpa's wife's father was a Chinese railroad worker, 1866. But, you know, I guess it feels like it's 3 years plus now when we were discovering there's a fire in the middle of our ship. We gotta go put it out. Let's run like heck, put it out. And I appreciate you here, but the question I want to share with each of you is, wait a minute. What are the root causes and what do we do to deal and get to that?
I had mentioned in my story that the Asian American movement started from the Black Power movement and how I felt, because I was in college at that time, it was so eye-opening to me that, oh, I'm not just Japanese American, but I am connected to all these other Asians. And it was creating that solidarity, that coalition that gave me a much bigger sense of who we were, you know, very empowering. And also the connection that we had with the Black Power movement and the Latino movement. You know, the migrant workers who started, you know, with Cesar Chavez, they were Filipino, right?
The first.
Yes,
They were
they
first.
started it. He joined in, you're right. So I just feel, looking at that history, it's so important for us to continue that and to rebuild that coalition and more coalitions. Definitely, we have to
Allies.
include the LGBTQ plus community now. They are so, discriminated against now. It's scary. And it's not just them. Their fight is our fight. Our fight is theirs.
It's the sharing of stories. If you know someone's story, if you recognize this person, oh, you've gone through all this hardship. Well, I've gone through hardship too. There's connection and there's recognition. It's hard to hate someone whose story you know, that you've made a connection to, that this is a real person. And so in the work that I do, I go out and I tell these stories, these hard stories, so that people can connect to that and realize, one, they're not alone, but also that to educate people, to let people know that, there's a lot of these stories happened 100 years ago, 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. But if you take those arguments that were made at that time against the Chinese, you take the word Chinese, you put whatever immigrant group in there, throughout the years, it's the same arguments. You're taking away our jobs, how dare you? You're willing to work harder for less money, how dare you? Nothing has changed as far as that goes, and nothing will change until we sort of educate people and say, look at these, hold up the mirror and say, I'm a person too. Just like you.
I think racism, if you want to know a root, it's kind of ignorance, not knowing, not understanding. And they learn it young, and they learn it from their elders. So you have to start young. I mean, it's really based on, I don't know, they all, there's that saying, birds of a feather flock together. So there is something natural in our being animals in this earth plane where, we're a little leery of difference. But the only way it's going to change is that we understand that difference is okay.
Let me add to that. All these people here in this lineup, they work in schools, correctional facilities, community centers, libraries, all across the United States. And there's an army of us. There's thousands of storytellers, not just the Asian ones, but as we go out into our audiences, we're reaching the people. So I think that's one thing that we have to recognize too, that art really touches the heart, and that's where cultural activism comes in.